Welcome to the N1 Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Marcus Sadu, and today we've got Steve Hall from Revive Stronger on the podcast, and we're going to be chatting all about nutrition and supplementation to gain lean muscle mass while keeping body fat levels in check. And we're also going to get into a little bit of Steve's story and how he originally got into bodybuilding. So he was actually hit by a car and suffered a skull fracture, concussion, and his hormonal status was thrown off because of that. So we're going to chat a little bit about how he got all that stuff back on track. So I hope you guys enjoy this one. Steve, for the folks who aren't super familiar with you, your work, can you just let us know how you originally got into all this fitness and health stuff to begin with?
Cool. So, I have if I take it back to right at the beginning of my journey, it's a long story, but if I skip a lot of parts, which is probably worthwhile, the whole kind of Revive Stronger thing for me I've only really been doing it full time for 3-4 years now. So I've not been in the industry for ages, but I've been associated with health and fitness ever since being very young. I was kind of very much into it. And, we always kind of get influenced by friends, girlfriends, all these things kind of had an impact on me and how I got interested in training and nutrition. But it only really became a real passion of mine. And where the brand Revive Stronger came from was from an actual accident. So I was always into training, and I was always into running, and I did rowing clubs and football and everything at university. And I was on one of my traditional runs, and this was 10 kilometers, and I had my Garmin watch on and my heart strap monitor, everything. I was super keen. At this time, I was very focused on beating my previous best. And so I came to some traffic lights and they were flashing amber, and I just went for it. And I looked and a van hit me on the side. So really, unfortunately, kind of that caused me to have short term, I had fractured skull, scarring, which I obviously have to this day. But that head injury caused me a lot of problems and a lot of things I had to I became very isolated, had to go through a lot of things on my own. It meant that at university, my social life kind of died. I became very kind of isolated, and I wasn't a very social person. It kind of destroyed all of that. And this is where I found bodybuilding to kind of build me back up, in a sense of I was in hospital for a very long time. I was way out of shape again, skinny, not kind of fat. I just lost any of the muscle I'd built over that time, all my newbie gains, that had all gone. My confidence had kind of completely gone. So a lot of bodybuilding for me was building up my confidence back, building my physique back up. And during that time, I did a lot of things wrong. So kind of doing warrior diets, keto diets, intermittent fasting, not really knowing what I was doing and just following random programs, random nutritional protocols. But I got results kind of despite all of that, because you do get those newbie results, which is nice. And during this period of time, I kind of forced myself to get through university. Wasn't kind of in a good way. I didn't really enjoy it, but I got through it. It was kind of just, let's get the degree, let's move out. And then I kind of got an office job that I wasn't particularly enjoying. And on the side of that, I was doing my bodybuilding. I was doing kind of reading into lots of things, and I decided to do a PT course on the side, and I educated myself there so that if a time did come that I decided to do PT, I could. So I decided to, after 4 years of office work, I was right, I'm just going to take the risk, and I'm going to go and become a PT at my home gym. I was still living at home at the time, so it wasn't a huge risk. And I started doing that. And at the same time, I kind of had, at this period of time, recovered a lot of the things that were unwell with me. So I'd incredibly low testosterone levels. I kind of recovered that. I had my sodium levels had plummeted very low. I was kind of at risk of having seizures and things, and I was on diuretics for a very long period of time. I recovered through that, and I got myself to somewhat of a decent physical person. I looked like I lift pretty much. I looked okay, and over that course I'd kind of gone through bodybuilding forums and flex magazines and these sort of things, and I eventually found Lyle McDonald, Alan Aragon, who then I used bits from them, and that started my nutritional knowledge was going way better. Found Matt Ogus, and through him found 3D Muscle Journey, Eric Helms, a lot of kind of natural guys who are very clued up. And this allowed me to build somewhat of a decent physique. So as I kind of built up all this knowledge that I was kind of accumulating on the side of what I was doing office job wise, I became a personal trainer. one-on-one. And in that time, I also decided, right, I've got my kind of health kind of in a good place now, kind of gone through all that dark times. I kind of felt like I needed to compete in natural bodybuilding to prove to myself that I had recovered from it. It always followed me like a shadow, this head injury, the kind of poor testosterone levels, the kind of low sodium, and it somewhat still shadows some of the things I do today. I wouldn't say I'm fully recovered from it all. Some of it still is unfortunately there, but not anywhere near where it was. It was certainly not a good time back then. So I decided to do a contest prep for the 2014 season. So I had a coach, I got shredded glutes, made it to stage. And during that period of time is when my PT online side was growing. I was initially called like the Fitness Hub, and then I went to Revive with Stephen Hall, and Revive Stronger eventually came out. And the Revive Stronger name comes from getting from that dark place after that accident where I was in a really bad position, where I was very depressed, very unconfident, looked in terrible shape, felt awful, and built myself up through nutrition, through training, educating myself. And I kind of thought, if I can do that through like where I came from, I can help so many people get through periods of time where they just feel down or they just feel lost. And I had loads of those challenges as I was coming out of this period of time where I did feel lost. I did feel completely, had no idea where I was going. And through education, I was able to come out of it. And that's where Revive Stronger spawned from. I was just like, I just want to help other people come from a poorer place to get beyond where they think even possible. And I kind of impress myself even now to think where I am, because I never thought I'd get to where I am now. So that's kind of where the ground roots of it came from. And then ever since then, I transitioned to away from one-on-one PT, and I became fully online. And then things like content creation, I was doing loads of blog posts originally. Those kind of really helped me get my initial client base. And then I moved into more so the podcasts. We have some seminars now. And so that's where it all spawned from. And now I'm thankfully in a position where I have a business partner with Pascal Flor, who is over in Germany. And then I also have Miguel Blacut, who's another coach on the team, who is kind of going to become a genius in the near future. He is insanely smart. And we have an intern on the team as well, Ryan Solomon. So it's insane to me to think of where we came from and where I came from. And it's just built to something that I'm truly proud of today.
That's so inspiring, dude, and happened relatively quickly. I mean, 4 or 5 years, I think you said. That's super quick. Now, yeah. This isn't exactly related to our topic today, but I think it's really important around head injury and potential testosterone issues for men specifically. So just as a little side note did you actually have to supplement with testosterone to get your levels back up, or how did you go about getting back to normal, essentially?
So yeah, I'm an open book with any of this, by the way, because I don't see any other way to be with it. Because I would never try and sidestep anything. And this is really important because I was the TRT that I did take. So I did take TRT, which was initially found out because I found hard nipples I always say hard nipples. I found hard lumps under my nipples, rather. So I have hard nipples now, but no, anyway. So
a little chilly over there.
I was worried it could be something much worse, and thankfully it wasn't, but it was gynecomastia, which is because my testosterone was just so low, my estrogen was way out of whack with it. So I was prescribed a testo gel, I think it was called, that I'd rub onto my chest. And I think I did that for a couple of months, and my testosterone levels normalized, the lumps went, and I felt incredible compared to where I was. Like, I felt like dog crap before that. I managed to be able to grow facial hair again and like actual body hair. I had no chest hair or anything. I was really depressed and didn't feel good at all. Obviously no libido. Like, libido is one thing I can remember went ridiculously wild. Like, it was ridiculous, and just felt so much better. And so I had to actually ask my doctor to come off, because I was like, I want to compete naturally. How am I going to do this if I'm on this? And he didn't expect me to be able to sustain normal, healthy testosterone levels without it. Thankfully, I managed to sustain low normal levels. And so I contacted different organizations within the UK, and 2 of them said, with doctor's notes, and if you pass our tests, so like the lie detector and everything, then you can kind of compete with us. So I did compete, and I think the other organization was a 7-year drug-free rule, or like banned substance rule. So now I can compete with them. Now it's been 7 years, so that's quite exciting.
That's really cool, man, and so important because I think, testosterone is just so vital for us to just general sense of well-being, like you said, libido, muscle mass, all that good stuff. So I'm glad we touched on that. Now, we're going to be chatting about setting up a lean bulking nutrition strategy, but first off, how should folks approach a lean bulking phase from a psychological standpoint? And I think this is really important because lean bulking may actually be the most difficult phase to be in, because bulking, where you don't really care about how much body fat you're adding, has some pretty immediate physical signs. And the same goes for fat loss, just because fat loss is just a much faster process than muscle growth. So how do you recommend folks approach a lean bulking phase from a mental angle?
Yes, completely true. And like bringing up fat loss is a brilliant one, because in a week you can see huge scale changes. You can see huge physical changes. You can literally lose like pounds of fat. Whereas with muscle gain, it's, especially assuming past the novice level, you're lucky if you're gaining kind of pounds within months. Like that's impressive if you're gaining pounds within months. So you have to take a much longer term perspective, and you need to focus on elements away from the physique. So that's something super important with mindset, is to focus less on how you're looking physically, less on the scale so much, more so on longer term aspects. And a big one for muscle gain is a thing people forget all the time when they talk about nutrition and muscle gain, is that training literally lights the match to muscle gain, and nutrition is the fuel for it. So nutrition is only permissive to how you train. If you're not training right, if you haven't got like hard progressive training in place, it doesn't matter how well you set up your diet, you can have perfect protein, nutritional timing, food selection, everything, you're not going to grow muscle because you haven't lit the flame there. So I always say to people, like, the mindset, you need to focus on fueling performance. If you're not fueling your performance adequately, then you're in a bad spot. And then the other thing I like people to focus on is less focusing on, okay, a lean gaining phase. I need to focus on gaining as little fat as possible during this period of time. I much prefer people to focus on gaining as much muscle as possible during this period of time, rather than as little fat. And obviously you don't want to go so far to go to those old school kind of dirty bulking approaches where you just have the seafood diet. You want to make sure it's methodical, you're thinking about things, but you put yourself in a decent place where you're eating plenty of food into a surplus, where you're fueling your training, you're fueling your recovery most of all as well, so that you can perform well in the gym, and then the scale's going to trickle up and the muscle gains are going to come with that. But it's taken me a long time to shift my mindset and accept that, because I even wrote articles, I've done presentations on something I named adipose phobia. It's fat phobia, basically, where you're constantly checking the scale, checking your physique. If it slightly fluctuates up, you reduce calories back down, and then you just end up wheel spinning. And it's horrible when you put in the effort in the gym, you're lighting the match and you've got no fuel there. It's like the most frustrating thing ever, and people waste so much time doing this. So mindset is so key with muscle gain.
Yeah, and I think I heard you, I don't know if you coined this phrase, but talking about gaintaining, right? And so I've struggled with this too, and it can be hard for people to see their body fat creeping up and potentially losing sight of their abs, especially for folks who have become really used to being quite lean. So how do you go about having a conversation with a client and essentially explaining that if you do want to put on size, you just can't be that lean year round, but if you do want to be that lean year round, then you're going to have to sacrifice muscular potential?
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, gaintaining, I don't know whether I got it from 3DMJ and I kind of morphed it into like a negative thing. I think they use it in a much more positive light, but it is a case of like, you're just looking to maintain, and like, I mean, maintaining is maintaining. That's not muscle growth. And there can be periods of time where that makes sense. And if you're going for a maintenance period and you call it gaintaining, potentially that puts a positive spin on something that some people view a bit negatively, and maintaining has its own kind of purpose. But if you're trying to build muscle, don't go for a building like maintenance phase. Like, that's just not the way to go. And you can build, like, I'm not saying, and people are probably well aware, you can build muscle whilst in a maintenance, like eating maintenance. It's just, you're not helping yourself. You're making the process much harder than it necessarily needs to be, and it's not very dependable. I know people, and myself included, where I have maintained for months on months on months, done the right things in terms of training, and I have stayed the same. Like nothing has noticeably changed. And I know I've even spoken to Mike Israetel about it, and he said he did his own experiment, and even he used he had access to a DEXA scan. He used the same DEXA scan, maintained for like months on end, did everything right, trained really hard, came back, and the DEXA scan basically showed he was the same within like tiny errors. So he was like, ever since he did that, he was like, there's no way I'm doing this again. And I very much agree. I think it's a really bad way to go about things when we haven't got a lot of time necessarily to kind of spend, especially if you're a competitive bodybuilder. If you're in a short off season, like don't spend loads of time just maintaining. You need to be pushing forward. So a way I like to theorize or like think about it with people is whatever you do in life, there is a cost. There's costs and benefits to everything. If you want to get better at your job, if you want to get a promotion, you need to put in work. You maybe need to put in overtime more than you necessarily want to. And you might have to sacrifice some time at home, watching TV, and being with loved ones. But that gives you the benefit of potentially getting more income to be able to do these other things. So it's kind of like you accumulate and you spend money and maybe you get some debt, which is the fat gain potentially. And then later on, when you're kind of potentially going for a fat loss phase or even comp prep, you can kind of then clean up. You can get rid of the debt and move forward that way. Like the grass is always greener. Whenever people are cutting, they want to be bigger. Whenever people are bulking, they want to be leaner. And you just have to accept there's always a yin and the yang, and you need to focus more so on the benefits of what you're doing and think less about the costs.
Yeah, and Mike sort of put it a really simple and straightforward way the first time I kind of wrapped my head around this. Is just like, it's really difficult to gain muscle, and we just touched on that, but it's relatively easy, comparatively speaking, to lose fat. So if you add a little bit more fat, but you maximize muscle gains, it's like, shit, that's a pretty good trade-off.
Yeah, I actually it's reminded me of an infographic, which I think it just shows it really well. Muscle gain is like cycling uphill. You want to help that process as much as you can. Like if you can have more fuel to be able to make it easier, if you can have grease around the tires to make like everything, you just want to bolster that. Whereas fat loss is very much like cycling downhill. It's super easy. Like you can just be in a deficit, train relatively hard, and fat loss can occur. Obviously at the extremes, it's difficult, but for the most part, it's pretty simple.
Yeah, and we're talking about, for the people that are like, oh, it's really difficult to lose fat. It is more so from a psychological angle, but we're touching on the physiological angle of things.
Yeah, and I think people often refer to like, oh, gaining weight is easy, and yeah, gaining weight is easy, but muscle gain is super hard, especially so like you said, the physiological element, especially when you're more advanced. It's a really tough process to try and get going.
Absolutely. So talking about weight gain, what are some of the rough weight gain rates that you like to see folks achieving over the course of weeks and months in order to make progress, but then keep body fat in check? So how do you recommend that folks then assess that progress as well along the way?
Cool. So I think in terms of rates of gain, you can think about relatively how advanced you are. So if you're more novice, then you might gain a little bit quicker within this reference that I'm going to give. And if you're more advanced, potentially slower. I don't know if that's necessarily the way you have to go. There's just not much research. So anecdotally, I find that being a little bit more assertive, even when you're maybe more advanced, just gives you that extra kind of impetus to gain. And I think being a little bit more assertive for people who really have their ducks in a row can sometimes really provide some great results. So I think that's important. So where you are in terms of like training age, definitely more novice, definitely pursue the faster rates, slower if you're a little bit more advanced potentially. And then also, like, do you have your ducks in a row? Do you have a low stress environment, or are you quite stressed and you're just kind of ticking along and progressing okay, but not at a super fast pace? Because you might be someone who's new or intermediate and you should be able to grow really quick. But if you can't put the time, you have a stressful life, and you actually progress like an advanced person due to poor kind of circumstances around you, potentially you shouldn't gain as fast because that could be a load of extra fat. So think about your environment as well. So someone very advanced who hasn't maybe had like the best recovery and had the best kind of training protocols, but they've optimized it all now, they could potentially grow much faster than you might think they might. And I think this is sometimes what happens with some advanced people is they get more knowledgeable, they really start nailing down things, they can grow better than they thought they could have if they really get their stuff together, which is sometimes why I love helping kind of intermediate trainees and really get their stuff nailed down, and they grow better than they ever thought they could. So in terms of rates, I call it kind of like the methodical mass. Kind of, you're not going dirty, you're not kind of gaining all the weight and just like freeballing it, where you might gain all the muscle potentially, but you gain exaggerated amounts of fat that's just not worth the trade-off. And then you have like the lean bulk or the really slow kind of gain-taining rate that maybe you're kind of just seeing any increase on the scales like good, and over a month you might gain a pound at most. Even that might be a little bit quick for some people, but it's a bit too small to really measure properly, especially on like a week or 2 week basis. It could just be a fluctuation. So I like the middle ground of this, where you're gaining, like almost maximizing your muscle, but you're not gaining exaggerated amounts of fat like you might during a dirty bulk. And for me, this tends to be 1 to 2% of additional body weight per month. Or I like to look on 2 weeks. So I don't look at a week-to-week basis to make any adjustments to calories. I think that's a bit too aggressive and a bit too soon because we're going for a slower rate. I like to look every 2 weeks. Maybe if someone's stalled out or even gaining too quickly, maybe after 2 weeks of that kind of trend going, you make an adjustment. So that would be 0.5 to 0.25 to 0.5% every 2 weeks.
Gotcha. And then how do you recommend that people assess their progress outside of the scale? So do you like pictures, clothes, all that sort of stuff?
So the second part of your question, definitely the scale is one tool, but it is only one tool. And without all of them, you can't see a full picture. You need to have different mechanisms. So obviously, scale is one of them. But I think a very important one is performance in the gym, like we spoke about. You could be, like, your scale weight could be going up. You could be increasing girth measurements, but your girth, like your circumference measurements, your waist is probably going up very quickly if performance in the gym isn't in a good way. So you definitely want to be tracking performance in the gym, how your kind of volume PR is going, how you're doing for kind of repetition strength, protocols like that, like every mesocycle, looking back at previous ones, seeing how comparatively you've improved there. And then, photos I think are a great one. I don't particularly like measuring body fat. I think it can be really difficult to do with any precision and even with any consistency. Every body fat tool is just measuring other things to give an indicator to what body fat is. I always like James Krieger talking about how the only way to measure your body fat really is to chop you up and you'd be dead. So like, it's just, you're never going to get an accurate percentage, and no one cares what percentage body fat you are. No one needs to know. It's just, do you look healthy? Do you look how you want to? Do the judges think you're shredded, or whatever it might be? So I like photos, visuals. I also do like clothing measurements. So you might have just like a t-shirt you're wearing and it starts to get tighter on the arms. Certain places, I've had clients say this, they've had to buy like new trousers because they don't fit the quads now, but they're fine around the waist, these sort of things. So girth measurements, clothing indicators, pictures, performance in the gym, and scale weight. I think they're probably the prime ones. And then if like the majority of them are pushing in the right direction, you can be pretty sure that you are as well. But if most of them are pointing kind of the opposite way and only like one or two are, then potentially you need to analyze your nutrition, your training to make a correction for that.
That's great, man. Now, I think it's fairly common for folks to think that they might need a larger caloric surplus than they necessarily do. So aside from figuring out maintenance calorie intake, just because that's just so individual, people can start somewhere and then scale up or down. But what sort of a calorie surplus do you like to see for, keeping the body fat in check, but getting some muscle gain as well?
Cool. So, you can try and look at so if I'm looking to add 1 to 2% of body weight per month, how much do you weigh? How much theoretically do I need to then gain each week? And then you can divide that to work out like a calorie surplus of sorts. But for most people, like, it ends up falling in the ballpark of like 1 to 2 pounds, which for most people is like 300 calorie surplus is normally a good starting point, up to 400. And then because maintenance is dynamic and there's some people are hard gainers, and when you get close to like settling points where people really don't want to push up weight anymore, sometimes it looks like you have to really push the calorie surplus very, very high. Like throughout a gaining phase, that's why adjustments might be necessary, where you do push them up further. So you might start off, I think, with a 250 to like 350 calorie surplus, I think is a good rate, and then move forward from there.
Just out of curiosity, where you started your bulk, it was quite a long time ago, but how much have your calories changed over the course of your body weight climbing?
So yeah, there was a few points where, so I started obviously after my show, which was in 2017. And I've been not massing the entire time since then, but I was starting on I finished my competitions around 3,200 and I was pretty much maintaining around there, which is, I kind of did a reverse into my final shows. It's like another story, another podcast, but I was in a good place. So then I just kind of went to around 3,500 and I gained on that for ages. That's why I was really gaining on. I eventually had to move up to 3.6, 3.7, 3.8, and then I was gaining on 3,800 calories for a very long time as well. But to push into and past 195 pounds, I had to go to 4,200, which I went to 3.9, nothing happened. 4,000, nothing happened. I had to push to 4,200, and eventually weight started coming on. And this is what I was kind of talking about when you get to settling points. These are kind of where your body likes to be in body weight and in body fat. I'd never been above 190 pounds really. So anything in this zone right now is very uncomfortable for me. It's almost, even maintaining this is going to be uncomfortable. And sometimes that happens. And I don't think you want to get too far past that, because I think probably I'm going to get pretty fat if I kept pushing. But now and then I think it's nice to push above that and then hold that weight, because that should be a new amount of settled muscle that you've got.
Yeah, and folks are really familiar with settling points that have listened to the podcast before, because I've had Stefan Guillenet on, and it sort of works both ways, right? Settling points on the way down and the way up. Now, I believe you're doing a high carb mass, which you've clearly had a ton of success with, and personally, I'm a big fan of the high carb mass myself. But after calories are set, do you like to have people hit, say, a protein and a fiber target, and then fill in their carb and fat digits however they'd like, or how do you go about landing on macronutrient totals?
Cool. Yeah. So for clients, I do it very individually. So it depends on the person. Some people are very I want to try and maximize every single thing, whatever it be, theoretical, not necessarily fully evidenced. I just want to try things out. So with those people, I'll very much be okay, let's go for the high carb mass. We set your protein, set your fat at a lower end target, which my lowest is 0.3 grams per pound, up to 0.6 per pound. And I set that as okay, you can land wherever you like in that fat range. That's lower fat. Land in your protein, make up the rest of your calories with your carbohydrates. This is going to be a high carb kind of approach for you. And you're not going to get any benefits from going under this 0.3 grams per pound. So don't worry about that. Just land within this range. And that adds quite a big degree of flexibility. I say if you're going to go for anything, edge towards the lower end of that fat, if you really want to try and boost kind of the benefits of having high carbs. But for other people, I have tracking just protein, and I have just fat and carbohydrates, and just say, I'm not worried what you hit here. Just try and put carbohydrates around your workouts, because that's probably quite important for you, and just keep an awareness of how you're feeling and how food's dealing with you, and just hit your calories. There's a lot of people who are on big surpluses, or they've been in their off season for a long time and they're not super lean, so they don't feel these adjustments particularly. And I again, it's not because it's not surefire evidence that higher carb is certainly better. It's more so theoretical. We're never going to have evidence that are going to completely show it. I don't push that upon people. It's more of a choice for them. And then some people, they just have a kind of, I don't have many, but they might just eat mindfully. So they might have an idea of, okay, you're going to eat 4 meals a day. Make sure each of them have 30 to 50 grams of protein. Make sure you eat to kind of fullness or slightly overfull if you're in a gaining phase, and we're going to track body weight and just see how performance is. There might be periods of time they do that, and they might chop and change. So they might, on weekends, want some more flexibility, even if they're a high carb person, and just go to protein and calories. Then when they're on a holiday, they're just going to go to mindful eating, and they just switch between these strategies. And I think it's so great to be able to teach people them, because they then become very flexible in their ways, and they don't kind of get any kind of poor habits or slightly disordered eating, and they can switch and pick and kind of choose the ones that cause them the least stress, but still the same rewards that they would want.
Yeah, I love the flexibility in that approach. And I mean, it's virtually impossible to assess accurately, because I'm sure your training has changed as well. You're more advanced. The caveats could go on forever. But I'd love to get your thoughts on how much of your personal progress you potentially attribute during this bulking phase to the high carb massing diet aspect itself versus what you've done in the past with your nutrition.
Cool. So I think it's interesting because in the past, I was always just a protein and like calories. That's what I do in my other off seasons. And you're completely right in that not only have I tried to kind of put my nutrition in the best place possible, but my training knowledge is way more advanced, and I've taken much better care of sleep. I never had such an awareness of how important that was. Recovery strategies, everything is in a better place now. I'm trying to kind of optimize, I guess, as everything I can. So it is really hard. And the great point is nothing's in a vacuum. So I can't say this definitely did this or this definitely did this. I think I'd like to think that the approach has really helped, but I can't possibly say. I just know I feel pretty damn energetic in myself. The volumes I've been able to manage and my recovery has been higher than ever before. And I can't necessarily say this percentage was definitely high carb massing, but from everything that's happened, it's certainly part of the puzzle that has made my off season a success.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, man. And I think really what it comes down to, it's so impossible to separate out. And like you said, it's not in a vacuum. So for people at home listening, it's just eat based on your general food preferences, and then obviously, but eat enough carbohydrate to fuel performance in the gym.
Yeah, I think I also always probably had a bit of a preference for higher carbs anyway. And when you get into, I don't know, I just find fat is just something that it always just sits heavy on me and everything. So I just feel more kind of, I don't know, athletic and able to perform when I've got more carbohydrates in my system.
I feel the exact same way. Now, how do you recommend folks structure their meal cadence? So, for example, is there a lower limit and an upper limit of meal frequency when you like to see when people are massing?
Cool. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of lower, generally 3. If people are taking it seriously, I don't like to see less than 3 meals, just because I think if 3 meals are situated quite spread evenly through the day, you're probably going to pretty much maximize the theoretical MPS, so muscle protein synthesis response. You're not going for hours without protein and stimulating that. So you're getting some nice kind of curves of spiking and then putting yourself in the best place possible. So obviously the difference between muscle protein synthesis, muscle protein breakdown is the amount of muscle you could possibly grow. So if you're not maximizing muscle protein synthesis, that's not good. So something like intermittent fasting would certainly be suboptimal for muscle growth. And I'm not saying you can't grow muscle like that. It's just definitely suboptimal. And having 3 meals through the day or 3 servings of protein even is a fine way to do it. Because I might have clients who are like, I love intermittent fasting. It keeps me under control. Or even when dieting. And I'll always say, can we do like a protein modified approach where you have boluses of protein through the day, but the rest, like carbs, fats, don't have any of that. That can work really well for people. So 3 would generally be the lower. I tend to say 6 as the higher end. Anything more than that, I just can't really see it as working very well, and it becomes a bit kind of, it just doesn't fit within the day even. So yeah, 6 seems to be kind of the upper limit, 3 seems to be the lower. More than 6 as well, you could say, and I don't think this is evidenced either necessarily, but you might spread your protein so thinly that you don't necessarily maximize have the leucine threshold, maximize the MPS response. So you might leave some gains on the table there. It's not completely seen whether or not that's kind of fully evidenced, but just to kind of secure yourself, don't go over 6 and spread your protein so thinly, especially maybe some smaller guys or smaller females who don't have that much protein. Maybe they're only on 150 grams. They spread that over 6 meals. They're probably just about surviving that threshold. But if they're much smaller than that, 7, 8 meals, they're getting to like less than 20 grams of protein per meal, which is really low.
Yeah, and eventually you just kind of get to a point where eating is literally your job.
Like every 2 hours.
Yeah. Now, with the people that really like the intermittent fasting approach and you like to modify and say, can we just maybe throw, if they have 2 meals, throw 1 additional protein serving in there, are you having them have like a shake in the morning kind of thing and then a standard lunch and dinner, or how do you like to do that?
Yeah, generally it is something along the lines of a protein shake. If it's anything solid, that tends to negate the benefit that they're feeling from intermittent fasting. I don't know what it is, whether it's psychological or if there's any physiological reason for it. But when they start chewing on something and like swallowing rather than just like liquid seems to just be like they're having nothing and they maintain their like satiety. But as soon as they start chewing on things, that seems to set off hunger, and that seems to not work so well. But I'd be fine if it didn't do that. It would be fine to have like egg whites or something, but people don't tend to find the benefit there.
Yeah, maybe it's the digestion rate. I'm not really sure. Chewing has some sort of evolutionary mechanism at play where it sparks appetite. Who knows? But yeah, I totally hear you. Practically speaking, that makes a ton of sense.
Chewing is actually, like, the more you chew is going to provide more satiation. Like, that's the cue. Like, when you're dieting, chew your food nice and slowly. So it is just a weird thing. And it's the same with, like, if you have someone have a refeed or a diet break, like, this should be more like satiation, but as soon as you give them that, it seems to spike hunger. And I don't know the kind of mechanism behind it, whether or not, like, it's evolutionary. The body's like, oh, we've got food now, gorge. It's strange.
It really is. It's really fascinating. Now, I know you've chatted with Broderick about this, so I'm curious to know if you shift your clients or your own calorie intake or macronutrient intake around on training days versus off days.
Cool. So I, in general, don't, because most of my clients have very similar calorie expenditure day to day because of the fact that they don't have, like, other sports they're doing. They don't have a really kind of active job where they're really on their feet, and then on the weekend, say they're not on their feet. Seems to be most people have, like, office jobs, or they're a PT with very similar expenditures, and then they're training 4 days per week plus. And so even their training sessions are maybe 200 to 400 calories at most. And then that's not additional calories. You're still burning calories in that time. So maybe they net an extra 200 calories on their training days, but then they're recovering on their rest days. So anyone training 4 times plus per week and has similar activity levels day to day anyway, I don't see the benefit. It just seems to be moving things for the sake of moving things. I always think it's a flawed approach to try and match your calorie intake to your calorie expenditure, because you can't ever know. You might, on your training days, be really knackered. Everyone after deadlifts, you want to go sleep on the couch. You don't want to move much. Whereas on your rest day, if you go shopping and you're walking around the supermarket, and then kind of that's like, and you walk home and you walk there, that could be an extra 500 calories. That could be more expenditure. So it's really hard to take control of that. And so if I'm really honest, I think it's much of a muchness by the weekly average, the number of calories you're having. And I don't think there's much benefit to cycling it. Only at times, potentially, when someone's in their later stages of contest prep, where they're really struggling with some training days, like their leg days, potentially getting really hard, you might just put a little bit more food on that day just to help them with it. But for the most part, and for me personally, I just keep my calories level across the week because it's just much simpler. My food can stay pretty level day to day, and I much prefer that approach. Some clients, we might change that for their preferences. They might want more calories on the weekend, and they do have that flexibility as well. So something I kind of always educate my clients on is, if you hit your protein every single day, you can then modify your fats and carbohydrates to change your calories by up to like 20%. So if you're on 3,000 calories, you can move 600 calories from one day to another, and you can just make sure you hit your weekly average of calories and you're in a good spot. So that gives lots of flexibility in itself.
Totally agree, man. Now, do you change anything nutritionally for yourself or for your clients during a deload? So do you like to keep things nice and consistent calorie-wise to account for the increased recovery demand during a deload, or do you do something different? How do you go about things?
Cool. So, yeah, I mean, the thing I think about with deloads is, what's the prime goal during that week? It isn't fat loss, it isn't muscle gain, it is recovery. That's the main goal during that week. So what's going to help recovery most, apart from deloading your training, obviously, so it's not overloading, you're reducing fatigue, is probably not being in a deficit. And then what else in that week? I mean, being in a surplus, that's going to bolster recovery somewhat, but potentially we don't need that much food coming in. So I tend to shoot for maintenance during deload periods, whether or not we're gaining or dieting. Now, I have gone through a phase of where, when I'm in a massing phase, I'll lead up the first 3 days of the deload, I'll continue in a slight surplus, because whether or not there's some delayed kind of muscle growth going on or delayed recovery, I think even there's been some research recently showing there's some like delayed effects of like kind of like you see delayed fat loss, there's like delayed muscle growth even. So that's quite cool. So yeah, half the week I tend to leave them in that surplus. Second half of the week, move to a maintenance because we just don't need it. We're fully recovered. And then with during dieting, I like to use it as a deload from training and a deload from your diet. So having a diet break, removing the deficit, moving to maintenance calories, so that they're kind of really feeling the recovery. And like we've seen with research over refeeds, the more days that you're in maintenance, that bolsters the effects of kind of all the reducing the diet fatigue by much more. So by having 7 days, it just seems to work so well, where we've seen a great recovery from the training, and we've set us up for more great training, and we've seen a great recovery from a lot of the things that have gone during the diet, set up for another phase of dieting. That seems to work really well. So tends to be maintenance during that period of time, and that's generally bringing down or bringing up carbohydrates, so keeping your fats generally on the lower side, depending on things.
I love that. Now, are you fussed much about nutrient timing with your clients? And potentially this may depend on how many meals someone is consuming. So we touched on this before, but because if somebody's consuming, say, 5 meals a day, essentially that ensures that nutrients are going to be entering the bloodstream virtually all the time versus someone consuming, say, 2 to 3 meals a day.
Cool. So in terms of priority, it's definitely a lower priority. So obviously we're thinking about kind of a nutritional priority pyramid. Calories, get those in check. Macros, get those in check. Nutrient timing, food composition, these two are where you then start looking at them once you've got these other things in place. For me, for nutrient timing, the biggest thing is protein for the most part. So you've got that muscle protein synthesis through the day. That's the biggest thing. And once you've got that, you could almost say the other ones, they just matter way less. So next is carbohydrates. So you obviously want to prioritize that post workout so that you're bolstering and you're topping off glycogen stores for the training session, and then you're helping recover those glycogen stores as soon as possible after the session. Now, it doesn't need to be that you put like all your carbs around that window because of the anabolic window and insulin and all of this, but it can somewhat help. It makes theoretical sense to put most of them around there, especially when you're in a deficit. Having pre-workout carbohydrates can be the difference between a good session and a poor session. Whereas when you're in a surplus, you're pretty much glycogen full all the time because you're just in a surplus. So it doesn't matter as much, the nutrient timing, in my opinion. Something I have been focusing more on and I want to play more with, and there's more research coming out about it, is having less before bed, because that seems to potentially disrupt sleep. For whatever reason, digestion's going on. Seems people wake up through the night and the quality's not as good. So I had always been a fan of having protein before bed, to kind of potentially benefit from a slower release protein, so you're getting MPS through the night as best you can. But I used to have people, I used to not worry about people having a lot of backloading their calories, and I end up doing that a lot when you're on a massing phase. You just got a lot of food to make up, but the research coming out isn't so favorable on doing that approach, so it seems better to try and move more forward. But that tends to be my general guideline, spread your protein out through your 3 to 6 meals fairly evenly through the day. Sandwich your workout with carbohydrates pre and post. Otherwise, don't stress too much about it, but we can look into it as much detail as you want.
Yeah, man, that actually leads into my next question perfectly, because it's around sleep and mealtime. And so I know for myself personally, if I go to sleep on a really full stomach, it absolutely impairs my sleep. I'm more likely to have night sweats and things like that, just from, eating it ramps up metabolism, all that sort of stuff. So how do you tell people to structure their meals around bedtime?
So I don't generally, at the moment at least, it's not something that I will talk to my client about unless they talk to me about having poor quality sleep. Then I will dig into what does their sleep hygiene look like. Are they in a routine? Have they got a dark, cool room? Are they utilizing things like blue light blockers potentially at night, or dimming screens, or at least having time away from their screens? Are they chilling out before bed? Are they supplementing with magnesium? Are they doing all the good sleep hygiene strategies, having a caffeine cap at 2 p.m. so they're not having kind of that in their system, potentially waking them up. They're not kind of napping right before bed. So I just dig into all of their sleep hygiene. And if having a large meal before bed after getting a lot of things in check, or if that's one of the things they're saying is I have a large meal and then go to bed, then that'll be okay, let's recommend moving it. But if they're having good sleep, then I don't dig into this for any, I don't dig into it. So in that regard, I think the 2 to 3 hours is a good idea. In terms of the last big meal. And then I think having a small protein serving before bed, I can't imagine that's disrupting sleep. I think Jorn Troblin has done a little bit of research where they've looked at protein before bed and it hasn't seemed to disrupt sleep. They haven't specifically been looking at it in a big way, but I imagine it's a problem when it's a big bolus of food before bed rather than a small amount. Because I think even some people, I think when they're dieting, probably benefit from having a little bit before bed so they're not hungry through the night. It's kind of that, it swings and roundabouts. So when you're massing, probably try and front load your food a bit more, I think is a good recommendation.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think in a mass, it actually becomes more important. I mean, when you're in a cut, it's just a low calorie intake total. So it becomes less important. Now, gut health is often overlooked, especially when it comes to bodybuilding and physique related endeavors. So it's coming on the radar more and more. And I know you've had Gabrielle Fondero on the podcast. I've had her on as well. What are you looking out for digestion wise to be sure that you yourself and your clients are maintaining good gut health on a mass?
Cool. So this is one of the areas where Gabrielle probably said it even when she came on. There is limited research in it, and it is a new area. And I'm very careful to be aware of my scope of practice in terms of I am not an expert. I've not got any kind of expertise in this. I'm not good at looking the research. It's kind of, I'm a personal trainer. I can look at like strength and conditioning research and nutritional research, but gut health, kind of lots of it goes over my head. So I'm very careful about this. And I do refer out to people like Gabrielle if this sort of thing came up. So for myself and for my clients, it's very much a question of like one of the vlog prompts that we have video updates from our clients. One of the questions is, how are your kind of meals sitting with you? So it's just a simple, like, and if they then report, oh, this one makes me really gassy, bloated, this one's caused me like diarrhea or whatever it might be, if they're talking about those sort of areas, then it's a case of, okay, what do I know? And the limited amount we know is like just from nutrition, excess fiber, that can be one thing. What's their sodium been like? Kind of, is this a food that is kind of intolerable quite often? So like dairy products, this sort of thing. Is it a FODMAP food? Past that, it then becomes an area of like sweeteners, this sort of thing. We have that good kind of knowledge base of like general recommendations. Past that, I think it gets quite difficult because it's very, very complex and everyone is so unique. So if I tried all of those mechanisms, taught them through stress, like stress can cause poorer digestion, lots of things like this, hydration, check the basics. Past that, if there's still problems, I would refer them to go see their GP, because there could be something worse going on. Their GP would then, or general practitioner, doctor, would then have to refer them to a specialist, or maybe even refer them out to Gabrielle, who obviously can help people further in this way. But yeah, looking at basically, are your meals sitting with you well? Is there any clear reasons why, like fiber, hydration, stress, artificial sweeteners? Potentially move away from FODMAP food or move to a FODMAP-based diet. So these are foods that generally cause gastric distress. Moving towards isolating towards foods that sit well with you, especially during a mass phase. I found this myself, like you gravitate to foods that sit well with you, and a lot of carbohydrates do, but you just have to be careful on the fiber. So I couldn't just have pounds of like brown rice and oats. This would just destroy me after like 500, 600 grams of carbs. So I do focus on kind of having cereal products sit really well, rice products sit really well for most people, not going crazy on the dairy. A lot of the people most people have somewhat of an intolerance. So if you're going crazy with it and you're getting in trouble, try just moderating it somewhat. These are some of the practices I do. But yeah, very much, I do believe it's, when you go deep with it, it's out of my scope. And I'm very happy to say that to clients where I'm like, it's out of my scope of practice. I apologize. You have to see your doctor or GP.
Yeah, man, that makes a ton of sense. Now, are there any subjective markers that you like to look at during a gaining phase? Like, libido should be kicking pretty good, general sense of well-being, wanting to train from the consistent calorie surplus?
Yeah, great point. This is important because I think a lot of kind of monitoring sleep is big, monitoring just general well-being, energy levels, mood, and like you said, kind of motivation to train. It's like an important factor, especially when you're kind of doing high volume training for a long period of time. It can get really tiring and sessions can get quite long if you're really quite advanced and you potentially have really good recovery, and it can get tiresome and difficult. And so I think these are important markers, and I don't necessarily mark them down in like a spreadsheet and monitor like libido or motivation to train. But these are questions that, my client knows to talk through with me during their kind of time talking to me. And actually with a contest prep client, this is something I will bring up in terms of libido, food focus. Are they constantly looking at the clock, waiting for their next meal, or are they like constantly stuffed? Where are they with their appetite? These sort of things, they're very important, because I've had clients before and I'd hate them to be going through weeks on weeks of training with a low motivation to train, because if they're really not motivated to train, they're not going to be putting everything they need to into the training to get the most from it. You want them to adhere to it as well. So if they're really dissatisfied with that, it's super important to get that in check. So yeah, these are things that normally are covered by talking through with my client, and not necessarily like in a data spreadsheet or anything, but they're so important to be aware of. And they're things I'm aware of with myself. Like, I know if my sleep's like astray, I know if my motivation's a bit low, and I can often link it to certain things that are going on, whether it be stress within kind of work life, or because I've been traveling, or because, yeah, my stomach's upset because I ate something different. These sort of things it's important to be aware of. And then, yeah, with libido, it's something that as a competitor, you're more than aware of, because you see it kind of swing, and it's important to make sure that it's back to a place that you are happy with, because it might take more body fat than you're really happy with coming on. It might take more time than you think is appropriate, and it's just being aware of that. And we have good research to show kind of time lengths of these sort of things, like Peter Fitchen's done and things. So it's nice to have that as well, to give further evidence, along with anecdote from myself and other competitors.
Yeah, I think libido on the top end of things and body fat is sort of like somewhat applicable to menstrual cycles for females on the bottom end of things. So it really varies as far as where your body fat's at, whether you lose your menstrual cycle or you have your libido on the top end. So yeah, it's really going to depend on the person there.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up menstrual cycle. This is something that I track with all my female clients. So just a case of where I just say, mark down where you've had your period, and then we're going to mark down. Some people perform better when they're on their period. It's strange. Like, some do. I've had clients who do. I've had others who are like really moody the week before, and like traditional, when they're on their PMS symptoms and they're hungry and lethargic, and I actually am looking to periodize their training around that. Other people see no difference. But it's just a good thing to be aware of, because also, like, you track body weight with that, water fluctuations. It's super important to be aware of that for females. That's more important. Well, it's probably just as important as testosterone for men, but maybe even more important because it's happening all the time. Certainly in contest prep, it's something to be aware of if it's stopped. If you don't know that as a coach and you're taking a female for a contest prep, that's a big no-no in my book, and is something that's becoming much more known to be careful with.
Yeah, and just from a progress assessment standpoint on a cut for women, if their weight is fluctuating like crazy around their cycle and they're like, oh my God, I stepped on the scale and they're heavier, and they freak, like, I track that stuff too, because it's really important to sort of take a look at those trends from person to person. Yeah,
it's nuts. You could have someone, if you don't know it, like, they could be on their period, they could have just gone and eaten out, and like loads of sodium along with being on their period. This could be like up to, like, I think there could be people gaining 10 pounds of water weight just overnight because of all this. So it's important to be aware of it. I'm glad the awareness has grown.
Totally. Me too, man. Now, on the supplement front, when it comes to a mass, is there anything you recommend to your clients?
So, yeah, I mean, like we talked about the priorities in terms of a pyramid, this is the last one. And everyone at Revive Stronger, we're really kind of not anti-supplements. Like, I'd never say that, because that would be shooting yourself in your own foot. If you've got everything in check, like take creatine, for example, is one of them. But so with this, I have some general health ones that I recommend to most people, and then some small amount of kind of sports supplements as well. And then outside of that, it's a case of maybe getting your bloods done or taking a risk or on certain ones that haven't got a lot of evidence behind them. So in terms of health, generally this is, if they're not eating fatty fish like twice per week, I tend to recommend some omega-3s. I think it's 2 to 3 grams of combined EPA to DHA each day, generally a good recommendation. And then vitamin D3, if they're not getting like half an hour of good sun exposure, that's something I would recommend. I think it's like 2000 IU is a good lower dose. I'm going to be surprised if I get these right, so people can call me out, or double check on examine.com. That's generally where I would check. And then in terms of general health, I think those are the only 2 omega-3s vitamin D3. Yeah, I think those are the only two in terms of general health that I recommend to most people that have a good amount of evidence behind them, that I'm not kind of worried that it's one day there's a study to come out to prove me entirely wrong. Like, you don't want to be in that position. And then in terms of, well, you could even call creatine like a general health supplement. There's even studies coming out showing how it's like helps with brain health and everything. So it's incredibly fascinating. But generally a sports supplement, it's just a no-brainer. 5 grams creatine monohydrate every day. That's going to boost your performance with weight training in the gym. More than likely, there are non-responders. So I would go down that route. Caffeine, I don't know if I'd call this necessarily like a proper supplement. Most people just get it through their coffee. But having like a decent hit of this before your workout, you can have like quite a lot for most people. I forget what the kind of general recommendation is there. I think it's like 4 to 6 milligrams per kilo or something, which is quite high. When you actually work it out, it's not like just a cup of coffee. You need like
super high.
Like you need like 4 double espressos or something. It's not a Red Bull or Monster. That's got barely anything compared. So caffeine, and then there's not a lot outside of that I'd ever recommend. Potentially, I have been more so saying like zinc is generally, most people can benefit from a bit more zinc, and taking magnesium as well. These are two, like magnesium before bed. Seems most people are low on magnesium. It's not something we get in abundance in the diet. Same with zinc, just avoiding citrate, oxide forms. That's generally what I recommend for those. And then, outside of that, it's a case of maybe getting your bloods done, seeing if there's anything particularly low, or taking a punt on something new that's coming out, like citrulline malate. I was taking that for a period of time because it seemed like it might be beneficial, but there's such a mix of evidence now that it's like, beta-alanine I was taking for a period of time, but when I look at bodybuilding and the specificity that it's going to help with that, I then decided that it's probably not something beneficial. I even tried HMB because it was shown to provide,
you and me both, buddy,
securing some muscle there. So, and this was in recent years. I've gone down glutamine, like I've tried testosterone boosters, the lot, but definitely not things that I generally recommend. Those are the basic ones.
Like Steve touched on, these are at the very end. Once you've maximized the nutrition, the sleep, the training, the stress management, then you can maybe start to look at some of this stuff. But definitely, priorities wise, those first 4 are going to beat the supplements out. Now, in your eyes, Steve, what's like the most common mistake that you see folks making during a gaining phase in their approach or nutritionally or training? What's that most common mistake that really sticks out to you that you see over and over?
So I think it is a case of, potentially, I'd say it's a lack of specificity. So they're not focusing on the things they need to be focusing on. So it comes down to that mindset where they are focusing on the lean bulk and the element of staying lean, and they're focusing more so on that than their performance in the gym. And they're getting their and they're focusing on the minutia. So they're focusing on potentially nutrient timing before getting the right amount of protein in place. They're jumping up the nutritional pyramid normally to supplementation. They're looking at pre-workouts and intra-workouts and recovery shakes and all of this before they've got calorie balance right. So I think it's just a lack of really getting the basic fundamentals right. And a lot of the people that come to me are, not surprisingly, have done the things that I've kind of struggled with, which is focusing too much on trying to stay lean, not allowing the scale to go up. But I think when you embrace that, that's when the best results come. And you really stop thinking so much about the minute details. You just focus on progressing, working hard in the gym, making sure you're low stress most of the time, eating well, and just move forward with like that. And when you get into that flow state, the results are just crazy. Like, they're great, and you feel like, oh, I'm not thinking about things enough. But you realize actually being in that low state of thinking about it, about the minutiae, is providing you better results because you're thinking less about it, and the results just come.
I couldn't agree more, man. I had that experience the other day where I was, I've been doing everything right, knocking out the basics sort of thing. And I was like, what else can I do? And I was like, oh yeah, there is. I just got to be consistent, stick with it, and keep going. Yeah.
It's one of those where loads of people are focused on like hitting a PR in the gym. They need to hit a certain scale weight or whatever it might be. And they're focused on that goal all the time. Whereas if you focus on the processes that get you that goal, you stay process orientated, it's so much better, and you actually enjoy like day to day much more.
As we start to wrap up here, man, is there anything that we didn't get to today that you'd like to mention, or is there something that you'd like to leave the listeners with regarding this topic, or anything else that we discussed today?
I think not really, but something that has come into my mind is throughout my career, and this is something I try and share as much as I can in terms of my journey gaining weight, is there's times where things aren't going how you want them to. And there's times at which you question whether you're a hard gainer or whether you can gain that amount of muscle mass. But if you keep ticking along with the things that you know work, you keep assessing your progress, you keep analyzing things, you keep that process-orientated mindset, you'll be surprised by how much muscle you can gain and the results you can gain. Because I know when I started, I didn't think I'd get anywhere where I am today. And I still want more, and I still think there's more to be made. So keep a positive mindset. No, you're not going to look your best when you're just starting out, but in the future, there's good times to come. Just like any career, you're at the bottom, you're working your ass off, you work yourself to the top, you become a CEO, you earn loads of money. It's a much better place to be, but it takes time to go through the process and be there. And consistency, like you said just at the end, super duper key. And that's been kind of where my progress has come from.
That's a great point, man. Yeah, it's really hard to visualize, when you're starting at, an entry-level position at a job that you could ever be the CEO of a company or something like that. It's just too far away. So I think that's a great point of focusing on the day-to-day, just staying consistent and sticking with it. Steve, can you let folks know where they can find more about you, your work with Revive Stronger, social handles, all that good stuff?
Absolutely. So anywhere Revive Stronger, basically. So if they head over to revivestronger.com, they can find our articles. Miguel's been doing a load of work over there on some great ones. The podcast is over there. Our coaching's over there. You'll probably find all our Instagrams. But if they search Instagram, Revive Stronger, search Facebook, they can find our page and our actual group over there as well. But it's free for people to join. But yeah, that's basically it. Revive Stronger anything, and they can find us.
Beautiful. I'll link to all that stuff in the show notes. And thanks so much for taking the time, man, to come on today. I really appreciate it.
No, I highly appreciate coming on. It's always nice to talk to like-minded people and share some knowledge, hopefully.
I hope you guys enjoyed that podcast with Steve Hall. Thank you so much for listening. If you are interested in personalized one-on-one nutritional coaching with me or workout design, you can check out the website at www.n1fitness.com. It's also just linked below. I'd also love to connect with you on Instagram, so you can reach me at N1Fitness, and then also feel free to friend me up at Marcus Sadu on Facebook and follow along on YouTube as well at Marcus Sadu. All right, I'll catch you guys on the next episode. See ya.